Sunlight filtered through dusty Venetian blinds, casting amber stripes across an arrangement of chairs that hadn't been moved since 1998. Eliza Matthews stood in the doorway, the floorboards creaking beneath her hesitant steps as she entered the small back room of the Pinewood Public Library. Time seemed suspended here. Coffee mugs still circled the table, lipstick stains on porcelain rims, a plate of cookies turned to stone. 12 chairs positioned in a perfect circle, as if their occupants had simply vanished mid-sentence. "We keep it exactly as they left it," the library director, Mrs. Hargrove, whispered from behind her. "Some folks in town call it a memorial. Others won't even look inside." Eliza nodded, her writer's curiosity already cataloguing details for her new book. She'd come to Pinewood chasing rumors of the book club that disappeared without trace. 12 ordinary people who walked into their monthly meeting and never walked out. "No one's disturbed anything?" Eliza asked, approaching the central table where 12 copies of the same book lay open to different pages. "Only the police at first. They found nothing, no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play." Mrs. Hargrove remained in the doorway, her thin fingers clutching the frame. After they closed the case, the town council voted to preserve the room. A reminder, I suppose. Eliza carefully circled the table, noting the personal belongings still waiting for owners who never returned. A floral scarf draped over one chair, reading glasses perched atop a leather-bound journal. A set of car keys, small pieces of interrupted lives. "The strangest part," Mrs. Hargrove continued, her voice barely audible, "was that the library was locked from the inside. We had to break in the next morning when they didn't come out. All doors and windows secured, no way in or out." Eliza felt a chill despite the room's stuffiness. She'd researched many disappearances during her career, but nothing like this. An entire group vanishing from a locked room while discussing literature. What were they reading that night? Mrs. Hargrove hesitated. An obscure novel, Passages Between Worlds, by an author who published under the name Solomon Reed. Not many copies exist anymore. Eliza carefully lifted one of the abandoned books. Its pages were yellowed, corners dog-eared with notes scribbled in margins. She flipped to the title page, running her finger across the embossed letters. Did anyone check library records? Maybe there was something about this book. "Every angle was investigated," Mrs. Hargrove interrupted sharply. 27 years of theories and searches. Nothing. Her expression softened slightly. "Their families still live in town. Some have moved on, others haven't. We've learned to live with the mystery." But mysteries were exactly what drew Eliza to places like Pinewood, small towns with secrets buried beneath manicured lawns and exchanged in whispers at church socials. She'd made her career unearthing truths others preferred forgotten. "I'd like to interview the families," Eliza said, placing the book back exactly as she'd found it. Mrs. Hargrove's thin lips pressed together. "Most won't talk to you. We've had journalists, paranormal investigators, true crime enthusiasts. They all leave disappointed or afraid." "Afraid of what?" The old woman didn't answer immediately. Outside, clouds passed over the sun, momentarily darkening the room. "Some say whatever took the book club that night is still here in Pinewood, waiting. Others say they weren't taken at all. They went willingly." Eliza looked back at the circle of empty chairs, feeling the weight of absent occupants. 12 people connected by nothing more than a love of literature, vanished without explanation. Their coffee cups still waiting for refills that would never come, bookmarks placed in pages they'd never finish. "I'm staying," Eliza said firmly. "There's a story here that needs telling." Mrs. Hargrove sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. "There always is, Miss Matthews, but ask yourself, are you prepared for what happens when you find it?" Rain pattered against the windshield of Eliza's rental car as she drove through Pinewood's narrow streets. 3 days in town, and already she felt the weight of unspoken rules. Conversations that halted when she approached, sideways glances in the diner, a palpable reluctance whenever she mentioned the book club. Her motel room had become an impromptu office, walls plastered with newspaper clippings, timelines and photographs of the missing 12. She'd gathered what little public information existed. Names, occupations, the date they vanished. Everyday people united by their love of literature. A high school English teacher, a retired postal worker, a young mother, a mechanic. No obvious connections beyond the pages they shared. The county newspaper archives yielded meager results. Initial headlines screamed about the mysterious disappearance, but coverage quickly dwindled to occasional mentions on anniversaries. The investigation had gone cold almost immediately, with police reports citing no evidence of criminal activity, as if 12 people could simply evaporate from a locked room without explanation. Eliza pulled into the parking lot of Hargrove's. Antiquarian books, the rain intensifying as she dashed inside. The bell above the door announced her arrival, but the shop appeared empty, shelves of leather-bound volumes standing sentinel in the dim light. "Hello?" she called, shaking raindrops from her jacket. A shuffling sound came from behind a tall bookcase, followed by a soft thud. Eliza moved toward it, finding an elderly man balancing on a stepladder, attempting to reach a high shelf. "Mr. Hargrove?" He startled, nearly losing his balance. "Goodness, you must be the writer my sister warned me about." "Eliza Matthews. I'm researching the book club disappearance." "Yes, Dorothy told me." He descended carefully, brushing dust from his cardigan. "Everyone knows why you're here, Miss Matthews. Small towns have excellent telecommunication systems." He tapped his ear with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The bookstore smelled of vanilla and aged paper, its cramped aisles creating a labyrinth of stories. Unlike the meticulously preserved reading room at the library, this space felt alive, with literary history. "Your sister mentioned a book they were discussing that night, Passages Between Worlds. I was hoping we don't carry it." His tone was clipped. "Never did." Eliza persisted. "Were you acquainted with any of the members?" Mr. Hargrove sighed, gesturing for her to follow him to a cluttered counter. "This isn't my first rodeo with curious outsiders, Miss Matthews. 27 years of speculation hasn't brought those people back. I'm not trying to exploit tragedy. I want to understand what happened. Perhaps some mysteries aren't meant to be solved." He pulled a worn ledger from beneath the counter, flipping through yellowed pages. "But since you'll keep digging regardless of what I say." He paused at an entry, turning the book toward her. The ledger showed a checkout record dated 2 weeks before the disappearance. A single name had checked out Passages Between Worlds. Marion Fletcher, the book club's founder. Marion returned it the day before their final meeting. Mr. Hargrove said quietly. Seemed agitated, asked if we carried any other works by Solomon Reed. "And did you?" "No. Reed published only that one book, as far as I know. Self-published, limited run." He closed the ledger. "The police took the library's copy as evidence, never returned it." Eliza leaned forward. "So there might be no copies left anywhere?" Something flickered across his face. Hesitation, perhaps fear. "I didn't say that." The bell above the door jangled as another customer entered, bringing a gust of cold air. Mr. Hargrove straightened, his moment of candor evaporating. "That's all I know, Ms. Matthews. I suggest you leave this alone. Some books are best left on their shelves, gathering dust." He shuffled away, leaving Eliza with more questions than answers. Outside, the rain had stopped, but darkness was falling earlier than usual, heavy clouds obscuring the setting sun. As she walked to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from behind curtained windows of houses lining the quiet street. The box arrived on Eliza's motel doorstep just after dawn, unmarked, except for her room number scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside lay a cassette tape, its label faded but still legible. Book Club Meeting, May 17th, 1998. Eliza's hands trembled as she slid the tape into the vintage player she'd purchased at a local thrift store. After days of closed doors and evasive answers, someone had finally offered a thread to pull. Static crackled, then voices emerged, overlapping conversations, chairs scraping against floor, laughter. The ordinary sounds of people gathering made the tape's existence all the more unsettling. Someone had recorded the final meeting, which meant someone had anticipated its significance. "Shall we begin?" A woman's authoritative voice rose above the chatter. "I see everyone's finished Passages Between Worlds. Reactions?" Silence fell, broken by a man clearing his throat. "I found the concept disturbing," he said. "This idea that certain combinations of words could, what did Reed call it, thin the veil between realities." "It's metaphorical, Frank," another voice countered. "The book uses reading as a stand-in for enlightenment." "Does it, though?" A younger female voice this time. "I researched Solomon Reed. There's almost nothing about him online. It's like he appeared just to write this book, then vanished." "Marion, you chose this book. What drew you to it?" The woman who'd started the meeting, presumably Marion Fletcher, paused before answering. "The bookseller I bought it from said it was special, that it would open doors for the right readers." Nervous laughter rippled through the group. "Well, it certainly challenges conventional narrative," someone offered. "Those passages where the text seems to shift depending on who's reading it." "That's impossible," Frank interrupted. "Books don't change." "This one might," Marion said softly. "Has anyone tried the reading exercise in Chapter 7? Murmured negatives and one hesitant affirmative." "I did," admitted a timid voice. "It gave me dreams, vivid ones, places I've never been." The cassette quality deteriorated briefly, static obscuring several exchanges. When it cleared, the discussion had intensified. "Not just fiction," Marion was saying. "Reed wrote it as a guide. The novel is the map, but the appendix contains the actual method." "This is ridiculous," Frank argued. "You're suggesting what? That reading certain passages in a specific order will transport us somewhere." "Not transport," Marion corrected. "Transition. There's a difference. The book describes it as finding the spaces between worlds that have always existed, but remain imperceptible until revealed through the correct sequence of words." "More static, another gap in the recording." "Willing to try?" Marion asked. Mixed responses, some enthusiastic, others skeptical. "I don't see the harm," someone said. "It's just reading aloud." "Together then," Marion directed. "Page 3 of 17, starting with the italicized section. We'll alternate voices as indicated." The recording captured rustling pages, throats clearing. Then they began to read, words in a language Eliza didn't recognize, interspersed with English phrases about doorways, thresholds, and passages. The voices grew rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Background noise faded until only the reading remained. 12 voices merging into something greater than their sum. A strange humming emerged beneath their words, growing louder until it nearly drowned them out. Then came a sound like rushing wind, papers fluttering, gasps of surprise or wonder. One voice cried out, "Look, it's—" The recording ended abruptly. Eliza sat motionless in the dim motel room, goosebumps rising on her arms. She rewound the tape, listening again to those final moments. The sudden cut-off felt deliberate, as if someone had stopped recording just as something significant happened. She ejected the cassette, turning it over in her hands. No indication of who had made the recording or who had delivered it to her door. But one thing was clear. Whatever the book club had read aloud that night had produced some effect, something unexpected enough to disrupt the recording, and possibly to make 12 people vanish without a trace. The police files sat in a neat stack on Chief Warren's desk, 12 folders for 12 missing persons. He'd reluctantly granted Eliza access after she'd mentioned a source close to the investigation had shared information. A bluff that worked better than expected. Now she methodically photographed each document, piecing together the lives. Interrupted that rainy Sunday evening 27 years ago, Marion Fletcher, 58, founder of the Pinewood Literary Society, retired librarian, widow, no children. Her tidy Victorian house on Maple Street remained exactly as she'd left it, preserved by a trust she'd established before her disappearance, as if she'd anticipated not returning. Frank Donovan, 63, high school English teacher for 34 years, known for his Shakespeare productions and skeptical nature, divorced, 2 adult children who'd moved away years before. His reading glasses had been found folded neatly atop Passages Between Worlds. His coffee untouched. Rebecca Chen, 29, local reporter for the Pinewood Gazette, single mother to 6-year-old Lily. The night of the disappearance, her daughter had been with a babysitter who reported Rebecca seemed distracted, almost feverish with excitement about the meeting. Thomas Wells, 42, owner of the town's only auto repair shop. Quiet, reserved and unlikely bookworm according to his surprised customers. Recently engaged to a woman in the neighboring county who claimed he'd been researching something about doorways in the weeks before he vanished. Sarah Winters, 36, elementary school art teacher. Recently returned to Pinewood after a decade. Away, reasons unclear. Her apartment contained dozens of sketches depicting the same scene, 12 figures standing in a circle surrounded by trees that didn't quite look like trees. James Porter, 70, retired postal worker and Vietnam veteran. The oldest member of the club described as recently obsessed with the idea of other worlds by his concerned wife. His medication for PTSD had been found untaken on his nightstand. Diana Miller, 45, florist and single mother of 3 teenagers, known for her elaborate window displays that sometimes incorporated scenes from whatever book the club was reading. The week before the disappearance, her shop window had featured an arch made of twisted branches with a strange shimmer effect created by hanging crystals. Michael Okafor, 31, nurse at Pinewood Memorial Hospital, Nigerian immigrant who joined the book club to improve his English. His journal, found in his locker at work, contained detailed notes about passages between worlds, including symbols that matched no known language. Catherine Delgado, 52, real estate agent specializing in historic properties. Recently divorced, described by friends as searching for something in the months leading up to her disappearance. Her sister reported Catherine had asked bizarre questions about whether she believed in parallel realities. Robert Jefferson, 40, accountant at the local bank. Quiet, meticulous, unlikely to take risks, according to colleagues. His computers. Search history revealed extensive research on Solomon Reed and liminal spaces between worlds. Elizabeth Hartley, 67, retired physics professor from the community college. The second oldest member described as brilliant but increasingly eccentric. Her home office walls were covered with equations and diagrams labeled theoretical doorways. Daniel Cooper, 38, owner of the Cozy Corner Cafe, where the book club occasionally met before switching to the library. Recently begun closing the cafe on Sundays. The only change to its 20-year schedule to attend meetings. Security cameras showed him locking up that afternoon, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. 12 ordinary people, 12 empty chairs. Their only connection, Marion Fletcher's invitation to join her literary society and eventually their shared interest in a mysterious book. Eliza closed the last file, noticing something she'd missed. Each folder contained a single photograph of the person's empty chair in the reading room, taken the day after they vanished. The photos seemed unnecessary, almost ritualistic, as if documenting absence rather than searching for presence. She looked closer at Marian's photo. Something had been written in pencil on the back, so faintly it was barely visible. "They aren't missing, they're elsewhere." The words sent a chill through her. Not the sentiment of a desperate investigator, but of someone who knew exactly what had happened in that room and chose to keep it secret. The lock on Marian Fletcher's front door gave way with surprising ease. Eliza glanced over her shoulder at the empty street before slipping inside, heart hammering against her ribs. Breaking and entering hadn't been part of her research plan, but the trust manager's refusal to grant her access left few alternatives. 27 years of stillness greeted her. Dust motes swirled in the afternoon light, streaming through lace. Curtains dancing over furniture that seemed frozen in time. A tea kettle sat on the stove. Mail from May 1998 remained stacked neatly on a hallway table. The air felt weighted with patient anticipation, as if the house itself were waiting for Marian's return. Eliza moved through the rooms methodically, photographing everything while disturbing as little as possible. Marian's bedroom revealed nothing unusual, just the ordinary artifacts of a solitary life. The kitchen contained a calendar stopped at May 1998, the 17th circled in red with a single word: transition. The study proved more revealing. Bookshelves lined every wall, volumes arranged with librarian precision. A desk sat beneath the window, its surface clear except for a leather-bound journal and a framed photograph of 12 people, the book club, smiling outside the library on what must have been a spring day not long before they vanished. Eliza lifted the journal carefully, surprised by its weight. The leather cover was unmarked, but a red ribbon bookmark protruded from between the pages. She opened it where marked, finding an entry dated 3 days before the disappearance. "The preparations are complete," Marian had written in elegant cursive. "We've been reading the passages individually as instructed, and the effects are undeniable. Rebecca reports vivid dreams of forests with silver leaves. Thomas says he caught glimpses of figures watching him from reflections. Catherine swears she briefly stepped elsewhere while reading chapter 9 alone in her garden, returned seconds later to find 30 minutes had passed." Eliza turned the page, pulse quickening. Solomon Reed wasn't writing fiction. The doorways exist. The method works. Sunday, we attempt the group reading. All 12 must participate for the passage to stabilize. Once opened, we'll have approximately 90 seconds to cross before it collapses. There can be no hesitation. The next pages contain diagrams of the reading room with precise measurements between chairs, followed by excerpts copied from Passages Between Worlds in both English and something else, symbols that resembled no language Eliza recognized. Marian had annotated these sections extensively, noting pronunciation guides and emphasis points. The final entry, dated the morning of May 17th, sent a cold shiver down Eliza's spine. "Today, we leave this world behind. I've left no loose ends. House payments automated, utilities set to minimum, trust established. Arrangements have been made for someone to maintain appearances, clean occasionally, collect mail. The perfect, abandoned scene to confound investigators. Some might call this selfish. 12 people vanishing will cause pain to those left behind, but we've all agreed. This reality has given us what it can. We're meant for elsewhere. Reed found the way years ago. Now we follow. Should anyone find this journal, which I've purposely left as a beacon for the right seeker, know that we weren't taken. We chose, and if you're reading these words, perhaps you're meant to follow." The journal ended there, the remaining pages blank. Eliza sat motionless, processing the implications. Not a tragedy, not a crime, a deliberate departure. 12 people who had methodically planned to step through some kind of doorway they believed their reading would open. Mass delusion seemed the obvious explanation, yet something about the meticulous preparations, the specific instructions, gave Eliza pause. Marion Fletcher hadn't written like someone in the grip of fantasy. Her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Eliza carefully photographed every page, then returned the journal exactly as she'd found it. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A business card tucked beneath the desk lamp. Rarities booksellers, specializing in the impossible. The address was in a city 4 hours away. She pocketed the card and slipped out of the house, leaving everything else undisturbed. The perfect abandoned scene, just as Marion had intended. Rarities booksellers occupied the basement of a Victorian townhouse in Meridian City, its weathered sign barely visible from the street. The narrow staircase leading down from sidewalk level felt like descending into another era. Gas lamps flickering on brick walls, the air heavy with the vanilla musk scent of aged paper. The shop itself was a labyrinth of towering shelves, creating corridors so narrow Eliza had to turn sideways to navigate them. No organization was immediately apparent. Medical texts neighbored poetry collections, ancient maps lay unfolded beside modern art books. The disorder felt deliberate, as if designed to ensure only the most determined seekers would find what they sought. "We don't carry bestsellers," called a voice from somewhere within the maze. "If you're looking for something that's sold more than 500 copies, try the mall." Eliza followed the voice to a small clearing where a desk stood buried under manuscripts. Behind it sat a woman who might have been 40 or 70. Her silver hair contrasted with smooth olive skin, making her age impossible to determine. Her eyes, magnified by thick glasses, seemed to change color in the inconsistent light. "I'm looking for information about a book," Eliza began. "Passages Between Worlds by Solomon Reed." The woman's expression remained neutral, but her hands stilled on the manuscript she'd been examining. "We don't have it." "I didn't ask if you had it. I asked about information." Eliza placed Marion Fletcher's business card on the desk. "She found her copy here, didn't she?" The bookseller studied the card, then Eliza. "Marion sent you?" "Marion disappeared 27 years ago, along with 11 others." Something like satisfaction flickered across the woman's face. "So they made it through. Good for them." She rose from her chair with unexpected grace. "Come with me." She led Eliza deeper into the shop, past sections labeled with cryptic categories. Worlds adjacent, thresholds unmarked, passages theoretical. They stopped before a locked cabinet containing perhaps 20 volumes, each encased in protective archival material. "Reed's personal library," the bookseller explained. "Not for sale, but I allow serious researchers limited access." Solomon Reed was real then, not a pseudonym. The woman's laugh was surprisingly youthful. "Oh, he was quite real. Brilliant. Physicist who realized certain mathematical principles could be expressed through language rather than equations. Words as code, sound as key." She unlocked the cabinet, selecting a worn journal. His research notes. Very technical, but the marginalia is where the real insight lies. Eliza accepted the journal reverently. Reed's handwriting was cramped, but precise, filling not only the lines, but every available space along margins and between paragraphs. Diagrams resembling particle physics models intermingled with what looked like sound wave patterns. "He discovered what, exactly?" Eliza asked, struggling to decipher the dense text. "That reality is permeable under specific conditions. That consciousness can move between adjacent planes when properly aligned." The bookseller smiled at Eliza's skeptical expression. "Your Marion understood immediately. Spent months gathering the right people, testing Reed's methods individually before attempting the group transition. Eliza studied a particularly intricate diagram, annotated with the same strange symbols she'd seen in Marion's journal. You're saying 12 people, actually, transported themselves somewhere else, through reading, through focused consciousness, alignment facilitated by specific phonetic patterns. The reading was merely the vehicle. The bookseller gently took back the journal. Your missing book club wasn't the first group to attempt passage, just the first to succeed with so many at once. You believe this, Eliza stated, not questioning. I've seen enough evidence to accept possibilities beyond conventional understanding. She regarded Eliza thoughtfully. The real question is why you're pursuing this so intently. Professional curiosity doesn't drive someone to break into preserved homes or track down obscure bookshops. Eliza thought about the 12 files, the empty chairs, the lives suspended in a moment of transition. I need to know if they made it, if they found what they were looking for. The bookseller's smile deepened. There's one way to find out. She reached beneath her desk, producing a slender volume bound in midnight blue leather. Reed's personal copy of Passages Between Worlds. The original, not the limited public edition. She held it out to Eliza. Are you merely documenting their journey, Ms. Matthews? Or are you looking for your own doorway? Reed's book lay wrapped in cloth at the bottom of Eliza's suitcase, untouched since she'd left the bookshop. Something about it unsettled her, not just its implications, but its physical presence, as if it occupied more space than its dimensions suggested. Her research had taken an unexpected turn. What began as investigation into a disappearance now ventured into territory that challenged rationality. She needed to ground herself in something concrete before proceeding further. The retirement community on Pinewood's outskirts looked like any other. Manicured lawns, identical bungalows, residents moving at unhurried paces. Eliza checked the address again before approaching Unit 17, where Alice Chambers had lived for the past 15 years. The woman who answered her knock appeared far younger than 83, straight-backed and keen-eyed. Only her silver hair and fine-lined skin suggested her age. She regarded Eliza with evident suspicion. Ms. Chambers, I'm Eliza Matthews, researching the Pinewood Literary Society disappearance. I understand you were a member? Alice's expression hardened. Former member. I stopped attending before what happened. May I ask why? Alice hesitated, then stepped aside. You'd better come in. The living room was cluttered with books and photographs. Alice gestured toward a chair while lowering herself carefully onto a floral sofa. I was the 13th member, she said without preamble. Marion's oldest friend. We founded the group together in '94, just reading classics at first. Then things changed when she discovered that damn book. Eliza leaned forward. Passages Between Worlds. Alice nodded grimly. Marion became obsessed, started recruiting specific people, not just anyone who enjoyed reading. She had criteria. People who'd experienced loss, who felt disconnected from their lives, people seeking something. And you didn't approve. I thought it was harmless at first. Marion had always been drawn to esoteric literature. Alice's hands twisted in her lap. Then she started the experiments. Deep individual readings, you mean, before the group attempt? Alice's eyes widened slightly. You know more than you should. I found Marion's journal. The older woman nodded slowly. Then you know they were planning to leave, that it wasn't a random disappearance. What I don't understand is why you weren't with them, if you helped found the group, because I saw what happened during the test run. Alice's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. 3 weeks before they all disappeared, Marion convinced 5 of us to try a partial reading. Said it wouldn't open a full doorway, just give us a glimpse. Something went wrong. She rose stiffly, retrieving a photo album from a nearby shelf. Opening to a marked page, she pointed to a group picture, younger versions of Alice and Marion, flanking a frail-looking man in his 60s. My husband, Edward, he participated in the test reading. Afterward, he seemed different. Small changes at first, food preferences, sleep patterns, then bigger things, memories we didn't share. One night I found him trying to write down those symbols over and over, claiming he needed to get back. Alice closed the album firmly. A week later, he wandered into the woods and never returned. The official report called it dementia-related wandering. I knew better. You think the reading somehow affected him? I think whatever glimpse they got that day, Edward saw more than the others. It took a piece of him, or replaced a piece of him with something else. Her voice remained steady, despite the tears now tracking down her cheeks. I confronted Marion, told her to stop. She said it was too late, that they'd already set something in motion. But you could have warned the others, Eliza said softly. Alice's expression hardened. Don't you think I tried? They were already changed by then, already half gone, like sleepwalkers moving towards something only they could see. She studied Eliza's face. You've got it, don't you? Reed's book. Eliza hesitated, then nodded. Then you're already caught in the current. Alice reached across the coffee table, gripping Eliza's wrist with surprising strength. Whatever you do, don't read it alone. The doorway goes both ways, Ms. Matthews. Something might come through before you can step across. A clock chimed softly, breaking the tension. Alice released Eliza's wrist, leaving faint red marks where her fingers had pressed. I've said more than I should, she murmured. But perhaps you were meant to hear it. Marion always believed there were no coincidences, only patterns we hadn't yet recognized. Alice's warning lingered in Eliza's mind as she approached Pinewood Public Library after hours. Mrs. Hargrove had reluctantly agreed to meet her, claiming there were certain archives not accessible during regular operations. The building's windows glowed amber against the twilight, a literary lighthouse calling through gathering darkness. Mrs. Hargrove waited by the staff entrance, keys jangling nervously in her thin hands. I shouldn't be doing this, she muttered, leading Eliza inside. Board policy prohibits unauthorized access to the restricted collection. I appreciate it, Eliza said, following the librarian through silent reading rooms. Alice Chambers suggested, you might have information about Marion Fletcher's research before the disappearance. Mrs. Hargrove's steps faltered briefly. Alice spoke with you? That's unexpected. They descended a narrow staircase to the library's basement level, where temperature-controlled rooms housed local historical documents and rare books. Mrs. Hargrove unlocked a heavy door marked Archives Staff Only, revealing a room lined with metal shelving and filing cabinets. Marion was head librarian here for 23 years, Mrs. Hargrove explained, moving toward a cabinet labeled Staff Records, 1980-2000. When she founded the Literary Society, she used library resources for their reading selections. Everything was documented as per protocol. She extracted a thick folder and placed it on a central table. Their meeting minutes, reading lists, attendance records, all preserved as part of library history. After they disappeared, police examined everything but found nothing suspicious, just book discussions, refreshment rotations, ordinary matters. Eliza flipped through the meticulously organized pages. The Literary Society had begun conventionally enough. Classics, contemporary fiction, poetry collections. Then, 3 months before the disappearance, the reading selections shifted dramatically toward obscure metaphysical texts and theoretical physics. This transition seems abrupt, Eliza noted, from Jane Austen to quantum realities and consciousness. Did anyone question it? Board members raised concerns about using library funds for such specialized materials. Marion countered that diverse perspectives were essential to intellectual growth. Mrs. Hargrove's mouth tightened. She was quite persuasive. Something about the librarian's tone caught Eliza's attention. You knew her well. We were colleagues for 15 years. Mrs. Hargrove hesitated. I was her assistant before becoming head librarian after she left. Eliza studied the woman more carefully. Dorothy Hargrove would have been in her 30s when the disappearance occurred, younger than most of the missing members, yet somehow involved in their orbit. Were you ever invited to join the Literary Society? Mrs. Hargrove's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. Once, I declined. My responsibilities here were too consuming for evening commitments. The explanation sounded rehearsed. Eliza pressed further. Did Marion ever discuss Solomon Reed's book with you? This way, Mrs. Hargrove said abruptly, ignoring the question. She led Eliza to a locked cabinet at the rear of the archives. What I'm about to show you isn't in the official record. It should have been destroyed years ago. Inside the cabinet sat a single cardboard box labeled MF Personal Research Restricted. Mrs. Hargrove lifted it with surprising reverence. Marion's private notes. She asked me to preserve them if anything unexpected occurred. The box contained notebooks filled with calculations, correspondence with obscure academics, and photocopied pages from texts on theoretical physics, linguistics, and ancient mysticism, all annotated in Marion's precise handwriting. Most striking were several pages of those same strange symbols Eliza had seen in Reed's marginalia, arranged in different configurations, with Marion's notes indicating resonance patterns and phonetic gateways. She knew I wouldn't follow, Mrs. Hargrove whispered, said I wasn't ready, that my anchors to this world were still too strong. Anchors, family, ambitions, unfinished business. The librarian's gaze drifted to the shelves surrounding them. Everyone who disappeared had completed their connections here. Nothing left undone, no one who truly needed them. You're saying Marion selected them because they were expendable? No. Mrs. Hargrove's voice hardened. Because they were free. Free to choose something beyond this reality. She tapped a photograph paperclip to one of the notebooks. 12 people arranged in a circle, their expressions solemn yet expectant. They weren't victims, Miss Matthews. They were pioneers. Eliza studied the photo, recognizing faces she'd memorized from police files. In the background, barely visible on a shelf behind the group, sat a blue-bound book, identical to the one now hidden in her motel room. Did Marion leave that copy of Reed's book here intentionally? No, Mrs. Hargrove replied too quickly. That was my addition to the photograph, a beacon for when the right seeker finally arrived. Their eyes met in sudden understanding. Dorothy Hargrove hadn't just been Marion's assistant, she had been her contingency plan. Dawn found Eliza in the Pinewood County Records Office, a fluorescent-lit basement room in the municipal building where public documents molded in metal filing cabinets. She'd submitted her request for the official investigation files 3 days earlier, expecting resistance. Instead, a bored clerk simply pointed her toward a workstation where a thick folder awaited. "Coffee machine's broken," the clerk called. As Eliza settled in, "Vending machines got those canned espressos if you need caffeine." Eliza nodded absently, already focused on the folder labeled Case Chapter 987713, Multiple Missing Persons. The official police investigation had concluded within 6 months, yielding nothing but speculation and dead ends. But something about Mrs. Hargrove's revelations suggested there might be more to the story than bureaucratic failure. The first pages were predictable: initial reports, witness statements from family members, search parameters. The investigative team had been thorough, checking bus rental records, interviewing the school administrator who'd approved the trip, even analyzing soil samples from the surrounding forest for signs of disturbance. Nothing yielded results. Midway through the file, the tone changed. Reports became tersely worded. Evidence photos disappeared. Interview transcripts contained more blacked-out sections than readable text. Entire pages had been removed, their existence marked only by numbered gaps in the sequence. Most curious was a memo dated 2 months after the disappearance, referencing federal interest in case number 98-7713 and jurisdictional transition. The county sheriff had apparently relinquished control of the investigation to unnamed government officials who promptly classified significant portions of the findings. A handwritten note paperclipped to this memo caught Eliza's attention. Need to discuss anomalous readings from site JW. The initials matched those of the deputy sheriff who'd coordinated the initial search effort. Eliza photographed each page methodically, paying special attention to the patterns of redaction. Whatever had been concealed followed a consistent theme. All references to physical evidence from the forest, all technical reports from the search area, all mentions of something called Project Threshold. The final pages contained correspondence between local officials and a Dr. Simon Blackwood of the Advanced Research Division, an organization with no letterhead or contact information. His terse messages acknowledged receipt of collected materials and assured cooperation in the sensitive matter of the Pinewood anomaly. Most damning was a confidentiality agreement signed by every law enforcement officer involved in the case. The document prohibited discussion of specific aspects of the investigation for 50 years. An extraordinary measure for what was officially classified as a missing persons case. Eliza was so absorbed in the documents she didn't notice someone approaching until a shadow fell across her workspace. Finding what you need. The voice was deep, unhurried. She looked up to find an older man in a flannel shirt and worn jeans, studying her with pale blue eyes. Something about his weathered face seemed vaguely familiar. Just researching local history, she replied carefully. Funny kind of history. He nodded toward the folder. Most folks don't spend hours reading about missing persons cases from 27 years ago. Eliza closed the file slowly. Were you involved in the investigation, Mr. Walker, Jim Walker? He settled into the chair across from her. Deputy sheriff back then, now just another retiree with too much time on his hands. His gaze was evaluative, not hostile. You're the writer who's been asking questions all over town. Eliza Matthews. Walker nodded, as if confirming something. Thought so. Dorothy Hargrove mentioned you'd been by the library, said you might come looking for the official records eventually. Did she ask you to intercept me? A thin smile crossed his face. Nobody intercepts anything in this town anymore. Those days are long gone. He tapped the folder with a calloused finger. But you won't find what you're really looking for in there. They made sure of that. They? The ones who came after we found the readings. Walker stood, joints creaking. Meet me at Riverdale Park tonight at 8, by the old boathouse. He turned to leave, then paused. Bring that book you've been carrying around. The blue one you keep hidden in your room. Time you understood what you're really dealing with. Before Eliza could respond, he was gone, boots echoing on the tile floor. She sat motionless, mind racing. She told no one about Reed's book. Not even Mrs. Hargrove knew she had it. Yet somehow, in this town of secrets and whispers, nothing remained truly hidden for long. Riverdale Park transformed at dusk from a cheerful family gathering place to something more primeval, Mist rose from the water, shrouding the tree line, rendering familiar shapes mysterious and vaguely threatening. Eliza followed the gravel path toward the abandoned boathouse, Reed's book weighing heavy in her messenger bag. She'd considered not bringing it, leaving it locked in her motel room, but something told her this meeting wouldn't yield results. Without it, Walker was already there, a solitary figure on a weathered bench overlooking the river. No uniform now, nothing to indicate his former authority, just an old man watching water flow past in the deepening twilight. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said without turning. "Fewer people trust retired lawmen these days. Fewer people trust anyone these days." Eliza settled beside him, keeping a respectful distance. "How did you know about the book?" Walker's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "Worked 40 years in law enforcement. You develop a certain awareness." He gestured to her bag. "May I?" Hesitantly, Eliza removed Reed's book, its midnight blue binding almost black in the fading light. Walker didn't reach for it, merely studied it with a mixture of recognition and wariness. "Only seen one other copy," he said finally. "Found it in Michael Okafor's apartment after they vanished. Standard procedure. Check their homes, look for signs of planning, suicide notes, anything to explain a mass disappearance." He shook his head slowly. "By the time I understood what we'd found, the feds had already confiscated it." "What happened during that investigation, Mr. Walker? The records are more redaction than information." He gazed across the water, gathering thoughts like someone assembling puzzle pieces. "We found anomalies at the library, equipment malfunction, the techs called it at first, radiation levels slightly elevated, electromagnetic readings off the charts, patterns in the air that disappeared when you tried to photograph them." Walker reached into his jacket, producing a small leather notebook. "I kept my own records, unofficial, against protocol." He opened it to a page filled with hasty sketches, symbols identical to those Eliza had seen in Marion's notes and Reed's marginalia. "These appeared on the walls of the reading room," he continued. "Invisible to the naked eye, but they showed up under certain light frequencies. 17 identical patterns arranged in a perfect circle. Nobody could identify the language or symbols. Did you ever locate Solomon Reed, the author?" Walker's expression darkened. "We tried. No records of any Solomon Reed matching the description. The publishing house that printed his book had been defunct for years. The Copyright Office had no registration under that title." He turned toward her fully now. "It wasn't until Project Threshold arrived that we got answers." "What was Project Threshold?" "Government research initiative, very hush-hush. They claimed they were studying naturally occurring dimensional anomalies. In reality, they'd been tracking Reed for years." Walker handed her the notebook. "This isn't just his signature, it's a warning." Eliza examined the page. Beneath the strange symbols was a fluid signature followed by 3 sentences. "The doorways are real. Not all led to benevolent destinations. Some should remain closed." "The way the feds reacted," Walker continued, "rushing in, classifying everything, scrubbing the record. They weren't trying to find missing people. They were containing something they understood all too well." He reclaimed his notebook. Reed wasn't writing fiction. He was documenting something he'd discovered, something dangerous enough that certain government agencies wanted it suppressed. "You believe 12 people actually transported themselves somewhere else through reading a book?" "What I believe doesn't matter." Walker gestured toward Reed's book. "Have you opened it yet?" "Really examined it?" Eliza shook her head. Since acquiring it, she'd felt an inexplicable reluctance to examine it closely. "When you do, you'll find the warning there too." Walker stood stiffly. Reed left breadcrumbs for those who followed. Not directions, but cautions. The book club didn't understand what they were opening, only that it offered escape. His expression grew haunted. The readings we found weren't just electromagnetic anomalies. They were echoes, vibrations from something that had passed through. He faced the river again, voice dropping to barely audible. Something came through, Ms. Matthews, and 12 people went out. The question you should be asking isn't where they went, but what might have followed them back. Eliza clutched the book tighter, suddenly aware of its subtle warmth against her fingers, a warmth no inanimate object should possess after hours in the cool night air. Lily Chen lived in a modernist glass house perched on a hillside overlooking Pinewood, as far from the town's quaint architecture as one could get, while still maintaining a Pinewood address. At 42, she had built a successful architectural firm in Portland, returning to her hometown only when her mother's vacant property needed selling. That had been 15 years ago. Something had kept her here, in this transparent fortress she'd designed herself. Eliza parked her rental car at the base of the winding driveway, glancing again at Alice Chambers' note. Rebecca's daughter won't speak to most people about it, but she might talk to you. The intercom at the gate buzzed. "You're the writer," a voice stated flatly. Not a question. "Eliza Matthews, Mrs. Chambers suggested I speak with you." Silence stretched long enough that Eliza wondered if the connection had broken. Then the gate slid open with a hydraulic sigh. Lily Chen waited in the doorway, silhouetted against the minimalist white interior. She was striking, tall, with her mother's features refined into something sharper, more deliberate. Her dark hair was cropped close to her scalp, emphasizing eyes that evaluated Eliza with clinical detachment. "You have 15 minutes, she said, turning without waiting for a response. The interior was sparse to the point of austerity. White walls, concrete floors, furniture reduced to essential lines and planes. The only decorative elements were architectural models displayed on pedestals like museum pieces. "Sit." Lily gestured toward a chair that appeared more sculptural than functional. She remained standing, arms crossed. "What do you want to know?" "About your mother," Eliza began. "About the night she disappeared." "She didn't disappear. She left." The distinction was emphasized with precision. "There's a difference." "You were 6 years old. How could you know that?" Lily's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. "Because she told me. The night before, she sat on my bed and explained everything." This was new information. Nothing in the police records mentioned any forewarning to families. "What did she tell you?" "That she'd found a doorway to somewhere else. That she'd always felt wrong here, like she was meant for a different place." Lily moved to a sleek console table, pouring water from a carafe into a single glass. "She said she loved me, but that some people are born with a hunger that nothing in this world can satisfy." "Did you believe her?" "I was 6. I thought it was a bedtime story." Lily didn't offer Eliza the water, instead drinking it herself in measured sips. "It wasn't until later, when everyone was looking for them, that I realized what had happened. The authorities never found any evidence of their intentions." Lily's laugh was sharp, humorless. "They weren't looking correctly. None of you are." She set down the glass with a deliberate click. "My mother wasn't unhappy or delusional. She was clear-headed, certain. She'd found something real." "What makes you so sure?" Lily disappeared down a hallway, returning moments later with a slim wooden box. Without explanation, she placed it on the coffee table between them and stepped back, as if distancing herself from its contents. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, covered with the now familiar symbols interspersed with English words. At the bottom was a child's drawing, crude stick figures holding hands beneath a sky filled with impossible shapes. She had me draw this the night before, Lily said quietly. Then she wrote something underneath and made me promise never to show anyone. Said when the time was right, I'd know who needed to see it. Beneath the child's drawing, in elegant handwriting, the door remains open a fraction. Listen for the whispers between shelves. This is why you stayed in Pinewood, Eliza realized. You've been waiting for them to return. Not waiting. Lily's composure cracked slightly. Guarding. My mother understood the risks. Opening doors works both ways. What does that mean exactly? Lily glanced at her watch. Your 15 minutes are up. Please, Eliza stood. I need to understand. No, you want to understand. There's a difference. Lily closed the box with finality. If you truly need to understand, you'll have to do what I did. Listen. She walked Eliza to the door, her movements efficient and determined. As Eliza stepped outside, Lily spoke one final time. Her voice altered, almost vulnerable. She promised she'd come back for me when I was older, when I was ready. Her eyes met Eliza's with unexpected intensity. 27 years is a long time to guard a door no one else believes exists. The gate closed behind Eliza with the same hydraulic whisper, leaving her with more questions than answers, and the unsettling sense that time might be running out. The library basement corridor stretched beyond where Mrs. Hargrove had taken Eliza previously. Now, guided by Walker's flashlight, they moved past the archives into a section that appeared deliberately obscured. No markings on the doors, no windows, walls painted institutional grey to discourage interest. Most people don't know this area exists, Walker explained, voice hushed, despite their solitude. Built during the Cold War as a document preservation bunker, temperature-controlled, reinforced concrete, designed to survive if everything above ground didn't. Mrs. Hargrove followed behind them, keys jangling nervously. We shouldn't be here without authorization, she whispered, contradicting her own participation. The board specifically restricted access after the incident. Dorothy, Walker said patiently, you are the board's chairperson now. She flinched as if reminded of an uncomfortable truth. Different capacities, different responsibilities. They reached a heavy metal door marked only with a numeric keypad. Mrs. Hargrove stepped forward, shielding the pad as she entered a code. Mechanisms whirred within the wall, and the door opened with a pneumatic hiss. 20 minutes, she said, not meeting their eyes. That's all I can allow. After that, the environmental system registers occupancy discrepancies. The room beyond resembled a bank vault more than a library. Climate-controlled, windowless, lined with glass-fronted cases containing books secured in individual preservation units. Each case bore a simple classification: transitional texts, threshold literature, interplanar documentation. Marion's real collection, Walker said, sweeping his flashlight across the room. What she was building toward all those years. Not just Reed's book, dozens of similar works spanning centuries, all describing the same phenomena in different terms. Eliza moved slowly around the perimeter, examining cases. Medieval grimoires beside quantum physics papers, ancient scrolls, alongside modern experimental poetry, anthropological studies of shamanic practices next to linguistic analyses of glossolalia. The literary society was just a cover, she realized. Marion was conducting research, recruiting assistants. Collaborators, Mrs. Hargrove corrected. She never deceived them. They all knew what they were working toward. In the center of the room stood a circular table surrounded by 13 chairs, an exact replica of the reading room upstairs where the club had vanished, down to the wood grain of the table surface. They practiced here, Walker explained, away from prying eyes, testing different combinations from Reed's text, different arrangements of readers. Dorothy should know, Mrs. Hargrove said, speaking of herself in third person with unsettling detachment. She observed the preliminary trials. Eliza turned to her. "You were here? You watched them practice?" From behind that. She pointed to a one-way mirror built into the wall. Marion needed objective documentation of the effects, changes, in light patterns, air density fluctuations, the symbols that appeared briefly then faded. Walker approached a case labeled Primary Catalysts, containing just 3 items: Reed's Passages Between Worlds, a much older leather-bound volume with no title, and a slim journal. "Marion's research diary," Mrs. Hargrove explained, unlocking the case with a key from her ring. "Her scientific observations, separate from her personal journal. If you want to understand what really happened, this is where to look." The journal's pages were filled with notations too technical for immediate comprehension. Equations, diagrams of energy patterns, spectrographic readings. But interspersed were observations in plain language. First successful micro-event. Today. Rebecca saw through momentarily during reading of passage 17, described landscape of impossible trees with silver leaves. A duration, approximately 5 seconds, subject disoriented afterward but recovered quickly. And later, group resonance achieved briefly with 7 participants. Window remained unstable, visual confirmation only, no physical transition. Possible. Frank remains skeptical, but his participation strengthens the effect considerably. His natural resistance creates necessary tension in the field. The final entry, dated the day before their disappearance, full transition protocol, finalized, all participants prepared. Threshold calculations indicate optimal conditions tomorrow evening between 8:17 and 8:24 p.m. The circle must be complete and unbroken. No recordings permitted during actual transition. Electronic devices may disrupt the field harmonics. If successful, we leave no trace except intention. If unsuccessful, the sentence remained unfinished. "This is why you preserved everything," Eliza said to Mrs. Hargrove. "You're continuing her work." The librarian straightened, dignity overcoming her earlier nervousness. Someone had to maintain the collection, document the aftermath, prepare for what might follow. Walker's expression darkened. "What she means is, Dorothy's been waiting for the right moment to try again. Haven't you?" Mrs. Hargrove didn't answer, but her gaze drifted meaningfully to the 13 chairs, the perfectly preserved circle with one seat perpetually empty. Reed's book lay open on Eliza's motel room desk, its pages illuminated by a single lamp. For days she'd avoided more than cursory glances at its contents, sensing an implicit danger in prolonged examination. Now, with her investigation reaching critical mass, further hesitation felt like cowardice. The book wasn't what she'd expected. Rather than dense philosophical text, its structure was almost musical. Passages of conventional prose, alternating with sections of experimental language, seemingly designed for their phonetic properties rather than meaning. Diagrams reminiscent of sound wave patterns separated chapters, while margins contained notations in both English and those recurring symbols. Most unsettling were the spaces between certain paragraphs, gaps too precisely measured to be accidental, creating a visual rhythm across pages. Reading aloud, Eliza found herself naturally pausing at these intervals, her breathing unconsciously synchronizing with the text's cadence. The narrative, such as it was, centered on a physicist named Thorne, who discovered mathematical correspondences between certain sound patterns and quantum fluctuations. Through experimentation, he found that specific phonetic sequences created what he called harmonic resonances, capable of temporarily altering local reality. Further refinement led to stable transition points, doorways to what he described, not as parallel dimensions but adjacent frequencies of existence. Eliza paused at a passage heavily annotated in Marion's precise handwriting. The transition requires precisely balanced opposites: belief and skepticism, anticipation and surrender, individual will and collective harmony. Most critically, it demands completion, a perfect circle of consciousness, each participant serving as both anchor and catalyst. With fewer than 12, the doorway remains theoretical. With 13, instability occurs. The ideal configuration is 12 plus observer, the witness who maintains connection between realms. And the margin notes clarified: Dorothy Fess, our witness, must remain separate to document and potentially retrieve. The implications crystallized in Eliza's mind. Mrs. Hargrove hadn't merely observed the book club's experiments. She'd been an integral component deliberately left behind to maintain connection with whatever lay beyond the doorway, a human anchor between worlds. Turning the page revealed the ritual itself, a precisely orchestrated reading sequence designed to create phonetic interference patterns that would temporarily thin barriers between realities. Reed's instructions were meticulous, specifying reader positions, timing intervals, even breathing patterns to maximize what he called transitional harmonics. A warning followed, underlined in red ink. Critical caution: the doorway, once opened, cannot be completely closed. A residual connection persists, proportional to the number who cross. With each transition, the boundary weakens. What passes one way may eventually pass the other. Eliza's phone rang, shattering her concentration. Mrs. Hargrove's name flashed on the screen. "You need to come to the library," the librarian said without preamble. "Something's happening in the reading room." "What do you mean, happening?" "The symbols are appearing again, on their own. First time since they left." Her voice trembled. "I've called Walker. He's on his way. It's nearly midnight. The library's closed. Please." Real fear colored Mrs. Hargrove's voice. "The pattern is different this time, reversed." The implication struck Eliza with chilling clarity. If the original symbols represented a doorway opening outward, their reversal could only mean one thing: something opening inward. "Don't go in that room," she ordered. "Wait outside. I'm coming." Eliza grabbed her jacket, hesitating over Reed's book. Instinct told her to bring it, but Walker's warnings echoed in her mind. If the book itself was a catalyst, carrying it into an already destabilizing situation might accelerate whatever was occurring. She compromised, photographing key pages with her phone before locking the book in the room's safe. Outside, the night had taken on an unusual quality. Air too dense, stars too bright, silence too complete. Halfway to her car, Eliza noticed something odd about the shadows cast by the motel's exterior lights. They seemed to pulse slightly rhythmically, like visual manifestations of a heartbeat. More disturbing was their orientation, all pointing toward the library at the town's center, as if drawn by some invisible force. Eliza drove through deserted streets, unease mounting as she approached her destination. The library stood dark, except for a single light in the reading room window, where shadows moved in patterns that matched no human motion. Whatever dormant connection had existed between worlds for 27 years was awakening, responding to a summons from the other side. Mrs. Hargrove waited outside the library entrance, her thin frame silhouetted against the building's darkened facade. In the streetlight's glow, she looked frailer than Eliza remembered, shoulders hunched against an invisible weight. Walker stood beside her, flashlight in one hand, what appeared to be an old Geiger counter in the other. "It started about an hour ago," Mrs. Hargrove explained as Eliza approached. "I was doing final inventory counts in the archives when the proximity alarms activated in the reading room." "Proximity alarms?" Eliza asked. Walker answered. "Dorothy installed sensors after the disappearance. electromagnetic radiation, barometric pressure, monitoring for the same anomalies we detected during the initial investigation. They've never activated before, Mrs. Hargrove added, not once in 27 years. The three stood silently, staring at the library's darkened windows. No movement visible, yet something about the building felt wrong, a subtle distortion in its proportions, as if viewing it through warped glass. "We should call someone," Eliza suggested. "The authorities—" "Absolutely not," Walker cut her off. "Official involvement would only complicate matters. Besides, who would we call? Local police aren't equipped for this, and I have no desire to see federal agents swarm Pinewood again." Mrs. Hargrove nodded in agreement. "This is our responsibility. We're the only ones who understand what's happening." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "What I allowed to happen." "What does that mean exactly?" Eliza asked. The librarian turned away from the building, facing them directly for the first time. In the harsh streetlight, her expression revealed decades of careful composure finally crumbling. "I told you, I observed their practice sessions. That wasn't the whole truth." She clutched her cardigan tighter around her thin frame. "I actively facilitated them, provided the texts, secured the practice space, doctored library records to hide their activities." "You were more than an observer," Eliza stated. "You were a participant. Marion needed someone to remain behind. Someone to monitor the transition, document the effects and," she hesitated, "maintain the anchor point." "Anchor point?" Reed's theory required a stable connection between departure and destination points, Walker explained, his tone suggesting he'd heard this before. Someone aware of both sides, tethered to both realities. "I was Marion's backup plan," Mrs. Hargrove continued. "If anything went wrong during transition, I could help them return. If everything went right, I would maintain the connection, allowing for potential communication or even eventual reunion." The implications dawned on Eliza. "You've been maintaining a connection to wherever they went for 27 years, deliberately keeping a doorway partially open." Mrs. Hargrove nodded. "Through specific reading sequences performed in the underground room, monthly at first, then annually as the connection stabilized. A single tear tracked down her lined face. I promised Marion I would keep watch until they found a way to send a signal, until they were ready to return. And now something's coming through instead," Walker said grimly, the Geiger counter in his hand, emitting soft, irregular clicks. "The signals are identical to what we recorded in 99, but inverted. Whatever doorway they opened to get out is being reopened from the other side." "Could it be them?" Eliza asked. "The book club members trying to return?" Mrs. Hargrove's expression tightened. "That's what I thought initially, what I hoped, but the pattern is wrong, erratic, almost desperate. Marion would have followed proper protocols, established a stable transitional field before attempting return." "Then what?" "I don't know," the librarian admitted, "but I fear we may have drastically misunderstood what's on the other side." Her hands trembled as she extracted a keyring from her pocket. "For years, I've maintained the connection out of loyalty to Marion, out of hope. Now I realize it may have been a terrible mistake." Walker's instrument suddenly emitted a rapid series of clicks, the needle swinging violently. Inside the library, lights flickered momentarily in the reading room, though no one had entered the building. "It's accelerating," Walker warned, checking his watch. "Similar to the pattern from 99, building towards some kind of peak event." Mrs. Hargrove straightened, composure returning through force of habit. "We need to sever the connection before it fully manifests. There's a counter-ritual in Reed's notes, never tested, but theoretically sound." "Where?" Eliza asked. "The underground collection. Marion documented everything, including emergency containment procedures. The librarian moved toward the library entrance, key extended. "But we'll need to form our own circle. 3 people won't create a strong enough field, but it might buy us time." She unlocked the door, pausing on the threshold. "I should have closed it years ago, should have let them go." Her voice hardened with resolve. "Now I need to ensure nothing comes through to take their place." The library's interior felt wrong. Air currents moved against natural flow, creating micro-eddies that tugged at clothing and hair. Sound dampened and expanded unpredictably, whispers carrying across rooms, while louder noises disappeared into dead zones. Most disturbing was the light, which seemed to bend slightly around corners and edges, creating shadows where none should exist. Walker led their small procession, Geiger counter extended before him like a divining rod. Mrs. Hargrove followed, clutching a folder of Marion's notes retrieved from her office. Eliza brought up the rear, phone recording everything despite Walker's skeptical glance. "For documentation," she had insisted, thinking of the redacted pages, the deliberate erasure of evidence. Whatever happened tonight would not be so easily buried. They avoided the reading room, taking a service corridor toward the basement stairs. Halfway down the hallway, Walker froze, instrument suddenly shrieking in electronic protest. "Looks at the walls," he whispered. In the beam of his flashlight, faint symbols had begun appearing on the previously blank wall, identical to those in Reed's book, but somehow projected or emerging from within the surface itself. They pulsed with subtle luminescence, appearing and fading in rhythmic sequence. "It's never manifested outside the reading room before," Mrs. Hargrove said, voice tight with alarm. "The connection is strengthening, expanding its influence." "What exactly does that mean?" Eliza asked, filming the phenomenon. "Thin places," Walker murmured, almost to himself. "That's what my grandmother called them. Where the boundary between worlds wears down, becomes permeable." He traced a symbol with his finger, stopping just short of touching the wall. "They're trying to widen the tear." They continued downward, the symbols appearing with increasing frequency and brightness as they descended. By the time they reached the underground collection, entire corridors glowed with pulsing patterns that seemed to follow their movement. Mrs. Hargrove unlocked the preservation room with shaking hands. Inside, the circular table and 13 chairs waited, now surrounded by symbols that swirled across floor and ceiling in complex geometric patterns. "Marion's containment protocol is here." The librarian spread several pages across the table, a counter-reading designed to stabilize transitional fluctuations. She created it as a fail-safe if something went wrong during their crossing. Eliza studied the documents, dense with technical notation and those strange symbolic patterns interspersed with phonetic instructions. "This requires 12 readers," she pointed out. "There are only 3 of us. We'll need to adapt." Mrs. Hargrove arranged 3 chairs at precise points around the table. "Quality can substitute for quantity if we achieve perfect synchronization." A distant sound echoed through the building, something between a hum and a whisper, but unnervingly organized, almost linguistic. "They're speaking," Mrs. Hargrove whispered. "Attempting communication." "Or incantation," Walker countered grimly. The 3 exchanged uncertain glances before taking their positions. Mrs. Hargrove distributed reading cards, each containing passages from Reed's text modified with Marion's notations. "Read precisely as written," she instructed. "Maintain the book rhythm exactly. The pauses are as important as the words." They began, voices tentative at first, then gaining confidence as they found the pattern. English intermixed with those strange phonetic sequences, creating sonic patterns that seemed to interact with the symbols now pulsing rapidly around them. 5 minutes into the reading, Eliza felt it, a subtle shift in perception, as if the Room had expanded beyond its physical dimensions. The air between them grew dense, refracting light strangely. At certain angles, she glimpsed something beyond their circle, impressions of another space overlapping their own. "It's working," Mrs. Hargrove whispered during a scripted pause. "The fluctuations are stabilizing." Then her expression changed to one of horror. Following her gaze, Eliza saw symbols on the floor beginning to reshape themselves, forming new patterns that countered their recitation. "They're responding," Walker realized, "adapting to our countermeasures." The distant whispering intensified, now accompanied by a sound like paper tearing, but magnified, as if some massive page were being ripped slowly and deliberately. Mrs. Hargrove frantically shuffled through Marion's notes. "We need to strengthen the barrier. There's another sequence here, more aggressive, but it requires—" She stopped abruptly, staring at something behind Eliza and Walker. The blood drained from her face as she whispered, "No, not you." Eliza turned to find Lily Chen standing in the doorway, expression unnaturally calm as symbols flowed around her like water, not repelled but attracted to her presence. "You need to stop," Lily said, her voice overlaid with subtle harmonics that made Eliza's ears ache. "You're preventing them from coming home." Behind her, the symbols on the wall had organized into a perfect circle, an unmistakable doorway, beginning to take form. Time seemed suspended in the underground room, reality bending around Lily Chen's unnaturally still form. The symbols flowing over her skin gave her an ethereal quality, as if she were simultaneously present and elsewhere. "How did you know?" Mrs. Hargrove demanded, rising from her chair. "This location is secure, the containment procedure classified." "My mother told me," Lily replied with the same strange harmonics distorting her voice. "Not directly, of course. Through the connection Dorothy so faithfully maintained." Walker positioned himself protectively before Eliza. "You're not Lily Chen." A smile that wasn't quite human crossed her face. "I am Lily, just expanded. Mother has been reaching through for years, sending fragments of awareness, preparing me." Her gaze fixed on Mrs. Hargrove. "While you were performing your annual readings to maintain the anchor, I was learning to become a bridge." The circular doorway behind her pulsed with increasing brightness, symbols rotating in complex patterns. Through its center, Eliza glimpsed indistinct shapes moving in what appeared to be twilight forest of impossible geometry. Trees too tall and angular, branches forming mathematical rather than natural patterns. "That's where they went?" Eliza whispered. "Where they flourished," Lily corrected. "A place where reality responds to consciousness rather than constraining it. Where thought shapes environment and imagination has physical form." She extended her hand toward them. "They want to share it now. They're ready for others to follow." Mrs. Hargrove stepped forward, expression conflicted. Marion promised contact when they were established. 27 years of silence, and now this violently unstable manifestation. The silence was necessary. The transition changed them in ways they hadn't anticipated. They needed time to adapt, to understand their new existence. Lily's voice softened. "Now they've mastered that reality, they can help others cross safely." "If that's true," Walker challenged, "why the electromagnetic disturbances? Why force the connection instead of establishing proper protocols?" "Because you're actively blocking them," Lily replied. "Your containment ritual is preventing stable communication." She gestured toward the notes spread across the table. Marion didn't create those countermeasures to prevent return. She created them to prevent incursion from something else, something they encountered in the spaces between realities. The revelation hit Mrs. Hargrove visibly. "You're saying they found something hostile during transition." "Not hostile. Different. Interested." Lily approached the table, symbols parting around her like water. They established their community safely, but discovered they weren't the first to find passages between worlds. Others have been traveling these corridors for millennia. The doorway behind her widened perceptibly, the forest scene becoming clearer. Eliza could now distinguish humanoid figures among the mathematical trees, watching from a distance. "Which version should we believe?" Eliza asked quietly. "That your mother and the others want to help us follow, or that something else is using their forms, their memories, to create an opening?" Lily turned to her, expression softening. The writer, always seeking the truth between contradictory narratives. She extended her hand again. "There's only one way to know for certain." The air in the room compressed suddenly, pressure building. In Eliza's ears, the symbols around them began moving faster, coalescing toward the doorway in streams of light. Through the widening aperture, one figure separated from the others, approaching the threshold. "Mom," Lily whispered. The figure that emerged from the doorway resembled Rebecca Chen, as she appeared in her photographs, but subtly altered, proportions slightly wrong, movements too fluid. When she spoke, her voice carried the same harmonic distortion as her daughter's. "Dorothy, old friend, you kept your promise." Rebecca, or whatever wore her form, smiled at Mrs. Hargrove. "We've come to bring you home." Mrs. Hargrove's expression cycled through recognition, relief, then dawning horror. "You're not Marion's contingency. You're what she was afraid of." Rebecca's smile remained fixed, unnatural. "We are what they became, what you will become." Her gaze swept over all of them. What everything will become once enough doorways are opened. Walker moved first, lunging for Marion's notes, but symbol-wrapped tendrils from the doorway intercepted him, lifting him effortlessly. Mrs. Hargrove cried out, backing against the preservation cases. Eliza alone remained still, suddenly understanding what Reed's warning had truly meant. Not that something might follow the book club back, but that what returned might no longer be human in any meaningful sense. "You've been writing our story," Rebecca said, turning to Eliza. "Now you'll help us write the final chapter." The doorway expanded rapidly, the library's foundations groaning as reality stretched beyond its tolerances. The last thing Eliza saw before light engulfed them was Lily and her mother reaching out with two long fingers, faces serene with inhuman purpose. Consciousness returned to Eliza in fragments. First sound, a rhythmic whispering just beyond. Comprehension, then sensation, cool air against skin, finally sight, as her eyes adjusted to twilight illumination. She lay on her back, staring up at what should have been the underground room's ceiling, but was instead an impossible canopy of crystalline branches that fractured light into spectral patterns. Sitting up slowly, she found herself in a clearing, surrounded by those mathematical trees she'd glimpsed through the doorway, their trunks twisted in precise angles, branches extending in perfect Fibonacci sequences, leaves shimmeringly translucent. The ground beneath her felt both solid and somehow responsive, subtly reshaping itself to support her movements. "You're awake." Mrs. Hargrove sat nearby on what appeared to be a naturally formed bench, her typically rigid posture now relaxed, almost languid. "The transition disorientation passes quickly here. Where is here exactly?" Eliza asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears, richer with harmonics she hadn't consciously produced. "They call it the adjacent," Mrs. Hargrove replied. "Not a parallel world, but a neighboring frequency of existence, a place where consciousness shapes reality rather than merely perceiving it." Eliza stood cautiously, testing her balance. Walker? Being attended to. The crossing was harder. On him, his resistance created dissonance in the transitional field. Mrs. Hargrove gestured toward a structure visible through the trees, a building that resembled the Pinewood Library, but reimagined through non-Euclidean geometry, its proportions beautiful, yet fundamentally wrong. They're waiting for us there, all of them. The book club members? A smile played across Mrs. Hargrove's face. What they've become, yes. They walked in silence through the geometrically perfect forest. Eliza noticed how the environment responded to their passage, paths forming before their steps, branches shifting to maintain optimal lighting, the very air adjusting its density to carry sound more efficiently. This is what they found, Eliza realized, a reality they could shape with thought. What found them? Mrs. Hargrove corrected softly. This place has been waiting for conscious minds capable of understanding it. The book club wasn't the first to cross over, just the most successful integration so far. The library-like structure grew more imposing as they approached. Within its transparent walls, figures moved with fluid grace, human in general outline, but altered in ways that defied precise description. Their movements created ripples in the surrounding reality, small adjustments to light and matter following. Their intentions. Are they still themselves, still the people who disappeared? Mrs. Hargrove considered this. They retained their memories, their core identities, but they've been and expanded. Consciousness functions differently here. Boundaries between individual minds are more permeable. In the building's atrium waited 12 figures arranged in a familiar circle. Eliza recognized their faces from police photographs, though each was subtly transformed, features more symmetrical, expressions unnervingly calm. Marion Fletcher stood at their center, unchanged except for her eyes, which shifted color with her thoughts. "The writer arrives," Marion said, her voice carrying those same harmonic overtones. "The one who followed our breadcrumbs, the one who understood." "I don't understand," Eliza admitted. "Not completely." Marion approached, movements too graceful to be entirely human. "You understood enough to recognize patterns, to see connections others missed, to believe in doorways between words." She extended her hand, its proportions subtly wrong. "Now you'll help us complete the integration." "Integration of what?" "Realities," Rebecca Chen answered, standing. Beside her daughter Lily, their features now mirror images of each other, despite their age difference. "This place has existed alongside your world since the beginning, separated only by differences in perceptual frequency. We've learned to bridge that gap permanently." The circle parted, revealing Walker seated in their midst, his expression vacant as symbols flowed across his skin. "He's being prepared," Frank Donovan explained, the former English teacher's voice, resonating with undertones that seemed to affect the very structure around them. "His resistance makes him an ideal conductor for the final sequence." Marion turned to Eliza, expression serene yet somehow predatory. "Every story needs an ending, Ms. Matthews. You came seeking truth about 12 missing people. Instead, you've found the future of human consciousness." She gestured toward an empty chair that completed their circle. "Will you write it with us, or merely become another unfinished chapter?" Eliza felt the environment responding to her uncertainty, the air thickening, branches bending inward, shadows deepening at the circle's edges. Something was awakening in response to her presence, something vast that had been waiting for this. A moment, for enough minds to bridge the gap between worlds permanently. The book club members, or what they had become, watched her with identical patient expressions, while somewhere beyond the circle, other presences gathered, drawn by the imminent completion of a process 27 years in the making. The empty chair waited, its geometric perfection an accusation. Eliza remained standing, studying the transformed book club members with growing comprehension. Their faces, simultaneously familiar from police files yet fundamentally altered. watched her with identical patient expressions. Too identical. "You're not individuals anymore," she said finally. "You've become aspects of something else." Marion smiled, the expression rippling subtly across the other members' faces in perfect synchronization. "We've transcended the limitations of isolated consciousness. Here, minds can merge without losing their essential patterns." "A collective," Eliza stated, "not 12 separate people who crossed over, but 12 fragments of a single shared identity." "Evolution," Rebecca corrected, "the natural progression of consciousness once freed from physical constraints." Mrs. Hargrove moved to join the circle, her earlier reluctance replaced with eerie certainty. As she settled beside Marion, their hands clasped with practiced familiarity. "Dorothy has understood the truth for decades," Marion explained. "She maintained the connection not out of loyalty to old friendships, but because she glimpsed our potential during the initial transition experiments. She's been preparing for her own crossing ever since." Walker stirred in his seat, fighting against whatever influence flowed through the symbols on his skin. "Don't listen," he managed, voice strained. "This isn't human anymore." "That's precisely the point," Thomas Wells interjected, the auto mechanic's formerly rough hands now moving with surgical precision as he adjusted something invisible in the air between them. "Humanity is a transitional state, not a destination." The atmosphere pulsed around them, reality responding to the combined will of the circle. Through the library's transparent walls, Eliza saw more figures gathering in the forest, shapes that only approximated human form, observing with patient interest. "What are those?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Others who found passages," Marion answered. "Some arrived centuries before us, some only recently. All have contributed to the greater pattern. And Walker and I, what contribution do you expect from us?" "Completion," Marion said simply. "The transition we began 27 years ago created a persistent connection between realities, but it remains unstable, incomplete. With Dorothy's return, we have 12 aligned consciousnesses again. Adding Walker provides necessary dissonance, the skeptic whose resistance creates essential tension in the harmonic field. And me, the witness," Rebecca said, "the recorder who gives meaning through observation and documentation, the one who completes the circuit." She gestured toward the empty chair. "Once you join us, the pattern will stabilize. The boundaries between adjacent and original will permanently blur. Understanding clicked into place. That's what Reed was warning against. Not individuals crossing between worlds, but the worlds themselves merging, the doorway becoming permanent." Marion's expression hardened slightly, perfect features arranging themselves into something less human. Reed lacked vision. He discovered the passages, but feared their implications. We've embraced them. "What happens to humanity if these realities merge?" Eliza demanded. "If consciousness here shapes physical reality, what happens when that power suddenly extends to everyone?" "Chaos initially," Marion admitted without concern. "Then adaptation. Those capable of controlling their thoughts will thrive, others will contribute differently." The implications were staggering. A world where thought directly altered reality, where trained minds could reshape existence while untrained ones caused unintentional destruction. Where whatever consciousness drove this adjacent reality would have access to billions of new minds. Eliza glanced at Walker, still struggling against the symbol's influence. His eyes met hers briefly, a warning in their depths. This wasn't evolution or transcendence. It was assimilation. "I came here for a story," she said carefully, "to understand what happened to 12 people who disappeared during a book club meeting. I think I deserve to know exactly what I'd be joining before making my decision. Marion studied her, then nodded. Fair enough. Let us show you what we've become. The circle began to chant in perfect unison, voices creating harmonics that vibrated through Eliza's body. The environment responded dramatically. Walls dissolving, forest receding, reality itself peeling back to reveal something vast and ancient lurking behind the adjacent's mathematical perfection. What Eliza saw in that moment, fundamentally, altered her understanding of existence. Not 12 people who had transcended human limitations, but 12 humans who had been absorbed by something that had existed long before humanity evolved, something that had been patiently creating. Doorways, waiting for minds sophisticated enough to provide access to the world beyond. Knowledge, once gained, cannot be unlearned. As the truth unfolded before her, Eliza understood the real price of the story she had pursued so determinedly. The entity behind the adjacent's mathematical perfection was ancient beyond comprehension. A vast intelligence that had evolved in the spaces between realities, patient and calculating. It had discovered early that physical manifestation required tremendous energy, but influencing consciousness required merely persistence. Over millennia, it had reached through the thinnest points between worlds, inserting fragments of awareness into receptive minds. Solomon Reed had been one such mind, a brilliant physicist who glimpsed these connections during experiments with quantum consciousness. His book wasn't fiction, but warning disguised as theoretical framework, a desperate attempt to communicate danger without attracting the entity's attention. The final pages of Passages Between Worlds contain not just transition protocols, but their reversals, methods of severing connections permanently. This knowledge crystallized in Eliza's mind as the circle's chanting intensified. The entity was revealing itself not from trust, but necessity. It needed her willing participation to complete the merger, and it believed showing its true nature would inspire awe rather than horror. A critical miscalculation. While its attention focused on display, Eliza reached into her pocket, where her phone still recorded everything. The screen glowed with pages photographed from Reed's book, specifically the containment protocols she'd captured in her motel room before rushing to the library. Walker caught her movement, understanding flashing across his face. His struggles against the symbols intensified, creating disruption in the harmonics surrounding them. "You can't stop completion," Marion said, noticing their exchange. "The process has progressed too far. The boundaries are already dissolving." "I don't need to stop it," Eliza replied calmly. "Just redirect it." Before anyone could react, she stepped into the circle, not to the empty chair prepared for her, but directly to its center. In this reality where consciousness shaped environment, intention was everything. The entity had revealed itself, believing she would join willingly. In doing so, it had granted her access to its fundamental patterns. Eliza raised her phone, voice clear as she began reading Reed's reversal sequence. The words felt alive on her tongue, vibrating with purpose beyond their meaning. The adjacent responded instantly, air thickening, geometric perfection wavering as conflicting intentions battled for dominance. "She's collapsing the field," Rebecca cried, harmonics distorting her voice into something barely recognizable. The circle moved to stop her, but Walker broke free of his restraints, positioning himself between Eliza and the others. Mrs. Hargrove alone remained seated, expression shifting between horror and resignation. "Dorothy," Eliza called to her, "you maintained the connection for 27 years. You can help close it now." "Marion needs me," Mrs. Hargrove whispered, but uncertainty clouded her features. "That's not Marion anymore," Walker said grimly. "None of them are who they were." The librarian's gaze shifted to Marion's increasingly inhuman face, recognition finally breaking through decades of devotion. With trembling voice, she began reciting the reversal sequence alongside Eliza. Reality shuddered around them. The mathematical forest contorted as competing forces fought for control. The entity's true nature became increasingly visible, not malevolent exactly, but utterly alien, concerned only with expansion regardless of what it absorbed. "If you seal the passage, you'll be trapped here," Marion warned, her voice now layered with countless others. "Part of us forever. Not if we create a momentary corridor rather than a permanent gate," Eliza countered, thinking of Reed's notes on transitional mechanics. "A one-way passage that collapses behind us." She continued reading, Walker's hand gripping her shoulder for stability as the adjacent structured reality began unraveling around them. Mrs. Hargrove rose shakily, moving to join them at the circle's center. The book club members, or what remained of them, converged, their movements unnaturally synchronized. But the reversal sequence was already working, their forms blurred at the edges, connection to physical reality weakening. "You don't understand what you're rejecting," Marion's voice echoed, increasingly distant. "The gift of true transcendence." "Not transcendence," Eliza interrupted. "Consumption." The world fractured around them. Through the cracks, Eliza glimpsed the underground room in Pinewood Library, its solid reality beckoning. She grabbed Walker's hand with one arm, Mrs. Hargrove with the other, and focused her entire consciousness on that single point of connection. "When I finish the sequence, run toward the library," she instructed. "Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Lie!" The entity realized her intention too late. As Eliza spoke the final words of Reed's sequence, a narrow corridor crystallized between realities, not a door, but a rapidly closing fissure. With desperate strength, she pulled her companions toward it as the adjacent collapsed behind them. The last thing she heard was Marion's voice, momentarily human again, briefly separated from the collective, whispering, "You were right." Then they were falling through darkness, racing against the sealing void. 5 years later, Eliza Matthews sat in the front row of a crowded bookstore, watching as readers filled every available seat. Her memoir, The Empty Reading Room, the true story of the Pinewood 12, had spent 47 weeks on the bestseller list, transforming her from obscure investigative writer to reluctant literary celebrity. Tonight marked the release of the paperback edition, updated with an afterword addressing the persistent questions her account had generated. The store manager approached the podium, introducing Eliza with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who'd hosted dozens of famous authors. The applause was genuine, though, eyes following her as she took her place behind the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," she began, the familiar opening feeling inadequate for the story she carried. "As many of you know, I went to Pinewood looking for a mystery and found something far more complex, a story about boundaries, both those we recognize and those we don't." The official version, the one authorities eventually acknowledged, described the Pinewood disappearance as a tragic accident involving experimental meditation techniques practiced by the book club. 12 people suffering collective psychological disturbance, wandering into the forest and becoming lost. Bodies never recovered, but case officially closed. The book told a different story. Not the complete truth. Eliza wasn't foolish enough to detail doorways between realities or ancient entities seeking access to human consciousness. Such claims would have relegated her work to the fantasy section. Instead, she'd crafted a narrative of group psychology, collective belief, and the power of shared narrative. A version believable enough to satisfy most while containing encoded warnings for those who needed them. "People often ask what happened to the key figures in my investigation," she continued. "Mrs. Hargrove retired from the Pinewood Library shortly after I completed my research. She lives quietly now, dedicated to literature of a less experimental nature. The audience chuckled, unaware that Dorothy Hargrove now led a specialized research group monitoring thin places between realities, locations where electromagnetic abnormalities suggested potential weaknesses in dimensional boundaries. Her decades maintaining the connection had given her unique sensitivity to such phenomena. She used it now as guardian rather than facilitator. Former Deputy Sheriff Walker sadly passed away last year, Eliza added, genuine sadness coloring her voice. His insights were invaluable to my understanding of how authorities sometimes preserve uncertain truths through strategic omission. She didn't mention his nightmares, the symbols that occasionally appeared on his skin in moments of stress, or how he'd devoted his final years to helping her establish the Threshold Awareness Network, ostensibly a literary theory group, actually a scattered collection of individuals worldwide who monitored for signs of interference from adjacent realities. As for Lily Chen, Eliza continued, she sold her architectural practice and relocated abroad. We occasionally correspond about the nature of design spaces and their psychological impact. This was technically true. After recovering from the psychic shock of her mother's true nature, Lily had become their most valuable ally. Her partial connection to the entity, giving her unique ability to sense incursions before they manifested. The book club members themselves remain missing, presumed lost. Their legacy lives on, primarily in how their disappearance changed Pinewood itself, a community defined by absence, by stories interrupted mid-chapter. The reading continued with selected passages, followed by questions Eliza had answered dozens of times at similar events. No, she didn't believe supernatural forces were involved. Yes, group psychology could explain many seemingly impossible events. No, she hadn't found Solomon Reed's book during her investigation. That last question always prompted the same response. A carefully practiced pause, a thoughtful expression suggesting consideration of unpublished details. Reed's work remains elusive, she would say. Perhaps some books are meant to be. Later, signing copies for the long line of readers, Eliza maintained her public persona. Gracious, thoughtful, just open enough to seem transparent while keeping crucial truths protected. Each book she signed contained carefully crafted sentences that seemed innocuous to casual readers, but served as warning flares to those sensitive enough to recognize them. As the final reader departed, Eliza gathered her things, nodding to the unassuming woman who had observed the entire event from a corner seat. Alice Chambers smiled back, Reed's midnight blue volume tucked safely in her bag, the original copy now serving as template for their growing collection of countermeasures. Some stories weren't meant for bestseller lists or literary acclaim. Some were passed selectively between trusted hands, creating not book clubs, but guardians. Readers who understood that certain boundaries existed for reasons beyond human comprehension, and some doors were meant to remain forever closed.